Hey everybody, I'm Kareem and welcome to episode 1 of I Read What I Read. This is my new book review podcast. I've been wanting to bring it to you guys for a long time, but I'm finally ready and let's dive into it. So I just finished reading a book called Strangers by Belle Burden. It's Belle's memoir about the disillusion of her marriage. It was actually a very good book. Right off the bat, I can tell you I give it 4 stars, 4 out of 5, 4 out of 5 stars. Belle read it in her own voice, and I usually love listening to memoirs via Audible because I love to hear the person read their words in their voice. And I read a lot of memoirs. It's actually one of my favorite genres. The only reason it's not getting a 5 star is because sometimes it was a little hard to follow. No disrespect to Miss Belle, Miss Burden, but it was a little monotone. And so I really had to keep myself listening for the depth of the story because it was just, it was, I'm sure in person she's probably a lot more lively, but you know, for some people that might have been actually a really good point, like it just was a very monotone voice and she read in a very conversational tone. But I guess most of the other memoirs I listened to were a little bit more interactive, but they also were by very different people talking about very different things. Bottom line is, it was still a good book. I will say that it kind of deserves a little bit of a trigger warning, not so much because of, it's graphic or anything, but it's a sensitive topic. And if you've experienced divorce or are currently experiencing divorce, it's really going to tug at your heart. In the book, Belle talks about her life once she discovered her husband had an affair and he ultimately left her and divorced her. It really is a pretty tragic story. It's not unlike stories we've seen on the screen and may have even heard from other people. I think what makes Belle's story a little more interesting, or just interesting in and of itself, is that it's from like the upper echelon. She came from a wealthy background. She had famous people in her family, and her husband is still currently a very wealthy businessman. So I think, not that I followed the people in the 1% or anything like that. So I don't know how many people have written about and publicized in, very public form. And we're not talking about celebrities. We're talking about non-celebrities, people that, are followed by paparazzi or whatever. I don't know how many people have talked about their story like this in a public forum. But Belle did. And she talks about in the book why she talks about it, how she came to talk about it. And she's very candid. And I really like that about her story. I think that even though she has the background she has, as she said, in the latter part of her story, a lot of people still found it very relatable because, let's be honest, hurt and pain knows no social status. It knows no economic status. It is an equalizer. When you are utterly destroyed by something that you thought was and realize it may have never been, that thing will level you. And nothing can save you, not your money and not your stature. That thing will level you if you're human. So it was a very touching story. I had some visceral reactions. I was just, yup. And that's one thing I like when I listen to a memoir, is that I kind of talk back to them, even though we know they can't hear us. But, I kind of talk back to almost any books. But anyway, this particular book, I was like, yup, And even if you're not, or even if you haven't experienced divorce, if you know anyone who's experienced, you will also resonate with it, because she talked a lot about the people who supported her. She talked a lot about the people who didn't support her. She didn't name names. I think she was very careful with how she said it, because these people, a lot of them are still living. She even gives a disclaimer in the beginning, saying what names were changed, what names remain the same, all those things. So anyone who exposes the deep, dark secrets of themselves, they're brave, quite frankly. You're brave. You're just 100% brave. Yes, in this day and age, people are absolutely exposing themselves regularly. That's such a weird word to say. Regularly on social media. But, it's still different when you put it down on paper, right? Because if you want, you couldn't delete a video unless it, gets caught up so much so and recycled that, you lose control of it and it's viral. But, or something I think people don't do enough of, you could never release the video in the first place. So you could hide whatever parts and then show whatever parts of your life that you want. But Belle put it out there. And the way I came about it, because I've never heard of her, I was scrolling on Instagram and I saw her, an interview with Oprah. And I don't even know if I follow the page, because you don't need to follow it. But I somehow stopped it and I was like, well, what is this all about? And so I listened enough to want to read the book, and immediately got off the post and went and got the book on Audible. And now I'm actually going to try and go back and find those posts, because I really didn't want any more spoilers after they had said enough to hook me. So I want to go back and see what she said in the post. But really, I think it was what I remember from the post was that they were saying how this man, her husband, had left her near penniless, or had basically really left her to fend for herself, even though he was a wealthy man and had built and established a considerable amount of wealth during their marriage and immediately after him, their separation, him leaving her. So again, it's not something that everyone will be able to relate to from a perspective of their lifestyle and their background. Although, as I said in my little quick video, which is kind of like a sister to this, which is like the introduction to this, which is called How I Frame It. And that's exclusively on my social media pages. My biggest tie to it, while incredibly, sympathizing with her story, was that a lot of it took place on Martha's Vineyard. And I am a recent devotee to Martha's Vineyard. I love it. I want to go back over and over and over and over again. It's slowly becoming a small dream or hope of mine that maybe I would own property there. But the story takes place at the height of COVID, right around the time of the shutdown back in 2020. And they quarantined and began to live on Martha's Vineyard. So that's where quite a bit of the story takes place. So in the midst of her talking about this story, I was a little bit drawn into her talking about the vineyard, because any and everything I can learn about it and hear about it, I'm all game. I love it so much. But that backdrop also really endeared me to the story, I have to say. And I hope that doesn't sound superficial, because it's totally not meant to sound superficial. It's just I enjoyed hearing about it. And again, I don't think that's a slight to Belle, because she made the vineyard and her life on the vineyard very much a part of the story, because it was a part and the backdrop to how she survived and how she made it through this incredible, difficult time and journey. And so I thought she handled the story with care. I was surprised to hear that some people accused her of being angry, of being bitter, of being revengeful. But what are you going to do? The people are going to say what they're going to say. And she can't take back any, the book's out. The book is out there. And she talked about the process of publishing it from an essay to a book and all that stuff like that. And I just applaud her for sharing her story. It was very good. Strangers by Belle Burden, 4 stars, audiobook preferred, if that's your thing. If not, just read it and let me know what you think. So I usually read multiple books at a time. I read via Audible, I read hard copy books, and I also read on my Kindle. A book that I just finished on my Kindle was called The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods. I believe it was by Evie Woods. I found that, I think, on Kindle or on Amazon or what have you, and just picked it up by way of how the description. Had never heard of it, just picked it up by way of the description. And it had a little bit of like of a science fiction fantasy thing going on with it, and I was into that at the moment, so that's what kind of drew me to it. But come to find out, it's a whole like historical romance novel, I would say, more so than like science fiction. There's a little bit of that element of fantastical happenings within the story, but it's really more romance than I had expected it to be, and I don't even know if the description said that. Now, I will say this: had I known that it was exclusively or more romance in it than was portrayed, I might not have read it, because I'm not really big into romance as a genre. But I'm glad I read it, because the story and the history that came out of it, which I believe the author used, some real, information as the backdrop to this story, as far as how women were treated and, the plight and everything, to give the story some more grounding, really captivated me. And at some point, I had to just put it down and gather myself. Because I was like, God really knows who to let live in what century and who can survive what. Because I'm reading some of the things, reading about the different characters, because there were three main characters and the story was told through each of their voices, first person. So reading about the character of Opaline and what happened to her, I had to take a minute a couple of times, because I was like, listen, I wish they would. I wish. Okay. So reading about that, and having to kind of deal with that, and understand that it was a story, it was a fictional story, but had a little bit of, historical background, I had to kind of muster through. Long story short, I liked the book. And I would also give that book a 4-star. I would recommend it. It was ultimately a good story to read. I felt good after it. And it was one of those things that I'm like, oh, I'm glad I read that. And I'm glad nobody told me to read it. And I'm glad I read it on my own. And yeah, it was a good book. Check mark. The last one I'm going to talk about is actually a series written by Becky Chambers, the Wayfarers series. In this series, there are 4 books, and I read them all on my Kindle. And so I will put them on the screen somewhere. And then, of course, all the books I review will be in the description here. So actually, I need to pause, because I need to make sure I read all of these right for the, because I don't want to misquote some of the long titles. There were a lot of long titles. And yes, I had to pull out my readers, okay? So the first book in the series is called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. The second book in the series is called A Closed and Common Orbit. The third book is called Record of a Spaceborn Few. And the last one is called The Galaxy and the Ground Within. So I found out about the first book in the series by way of an email from my local library, and they were having a book club. That was the book, and that was the book selected. So I didn't go to the book club, but I read the book because it just looked interesting. And it was another venture into sci-fi, which is something I'm steadily getting into, like futuristic or speculative fiction, stuff like that. So I was really interested in reading it. And then I loved the idea that it was a part of a series, which I didn't know until I started reading it. A Long Way to the Angry Planet basically transported me into space. And having watched, although not a fan, but familiar with Star Trek and Star Wars and those kinds of, shows or movies, really helped me center myself in the galaxy, if you will. But the book, and reading it in book form, opened my mind to other life forms existing in our universe, quite frankly. And I know that might sound really strange to some and might sound like hooray to others, but I want to just say that Becky Chambers wrote this book or this series so good that I just long to go there. I long to go into the series and to go into space and into the galaxy and into all the places where she centered the books. Now, I will say there were times where it got a little preachy, in so much that you could tell that Miss Chambers was on her soapbox and she was letting out her thoughts about certain things with humanity. However, I respect that, because every author is their book. They get the chance and opportunity and the right to write exactly what they want, how they feel. It's no big deal. If you don't like it, don't read it, right? Thus the name of the show. So I didn't mind it. I was like, oh, here she go. All right, here go Becky. She's on her little thing. Okay. Well, okay, we're good. All right, we're off it now. See, we're back in. But sometimes I actually kind of understood and agreed with some of what she said. Overall, I just like the character development. I really like exploring the different species and the different life forms. I'm trying not to say the word alien, because I feel like, even though, things can be alien, but, I like calling them life forms. I actually was envisioning them as much as she described them. Yes, it was a little X-Men mutant thing going on, and my favorite X-Men is Mr. Beast, or The Beast. I love him. He's blue, he's big, he's smart. That's my man. I've always loved him. Anyway, and I look for him in like all the X-Men. Beast is my man. I like the I love the other ones, but Beast is my man. Anywho, so when there were people that were kind of described by their color and by like their fur and stuff like that, that character was the first visual I would get, and then I would kind of morph it into whatever else, however else she described them. But the bottom line is, this is a really, really great series. Each book really does have its own identity, and she interweaves some of the storylines in all of them, but they could really stand on their own. But she was careful to make sure that each book had a little bit of, except for actually, I think the last two. No, the last one. And then Record of a Spaceborn Few, that one I don't think had as much of the other stories in it. There were actually 3 of them. The other 3 really had a character that came in from the story before. So Record of a Spaceborn Few, I don't recall it having as much of a tie-in to the first 2 or the last one. But that is not a slight to it. It is, like I said, all 4 of them are great. I actually give this series a 5. I really, really liked it a lot. It made me want to not only read more by Becky Chambers, but want to read more like it. And I think if any book does that to you, if it takes you deeper into the genre, if it takes you into that mindset that will open up your mind to, again, these kinds of topics and stuff, then it's a really, really great book. It's done what books are supposed to do: expand your mind, right? So Becky's Wayfarer series gets a 5. 5 out of 5 for me. All right, so I think that's enough for this pilot episode of I Read What I Read. And you don't have to ever apologize for anything you read. I am not a book snob. I don't care how you read it. If you read it via Audible, I said you read it. And I say I read it. If you read it on Kindle, if you read it on hardback, if you read it in paper or hard copy, or if you read it in paperback, listen. As long as you're reading and it's getting you where you got to go, I love it. If you like it, I love it. Now, I may not read it if you suggest it. There are some things that I'm just not going to read. But I love that you read it, and I love that you loved it. So if you like it and you want to say, girl, I get it because I know I read what I read, why don't you just go ahead and subscribe to this channel for this podcast? Make sure you also subscribe to my Kareem Agostini pages on Instagram, and you'll be able to see the lead-in to these podcasts that are going to be released immediately when I finish a book. Those would be my immediate thoughts. Thank you so very much for joining me for this inaugural episode. If you've read any of the books, or if I've made you want to read any of the books that I've discussed here, please let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Keep reading.